I was sitting in my home office, reviewing the quarterly projections for my web development business, when I heard the doorbell ring 3 times in rapid succession. The aggressive nature of those rings immediately put me on edge. I glanced at my watch and saw it was barely 9 in the morning on a Tuesday. I saved my work and headed downstairs, wondering who could possibly be this insistent at such an early hour. Through the peephole, I spotted a woman in her late 40s standing on my porch with her arms crossed tightly across her chest. She had that distinctive haircut, the kind that seems to defy gravity and common sense simultaneously, and her expression screamed trouble. I opened the door cautiously. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Are you Gregory Whitmore?" she demanded without so much as a greeting. "I am, and you are." "Patricia Henderson, president of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association. We need to talk about your illegal business operation." I felt my eyebrows rise. "I'm sorry, what illegal business operation?" Patricia pulled out a tablet from her oversized purse and thrust it toward my face. On the screen was a screenshot of my business website, complete with my home address listed as the business location. "This. You're running a commercial enterprise out of a residential property. That's a direct violation of our HOA covenants and county zoning regulations." I took a breath, already feeling my patience being tested. "Mrs. Henderson, I run a web development consulting business. I work from my home office. There's no storefront, no clients coming to the property, no employees besides myself. It's completely legal under current zoning laws." "That's not what our attorney says," Patricia shot back, her voice rising. "You have a business registered to this address. That makes it a commercial property, and commercial properties are strictly forbidden in Meadowbrook Hills." I had lived in this neighborhood in Scottsdale, Arizona for 3 years. I had purchased the home specifically because it had a perfect office space, and I had done my due diligence before moving my business operations here. I knew the laws inside and out. "With all due respect, Mrs. Henderson, your attorney is wrong. Arizona state law explicitly permits home-based businesses that don't generate significant traffic or require modifications to the property. I'm in full compliance." Patricia's face flushed red. "We'll see about that. You have 72 hours to cease all business operations, or we'll be forced to take legal action. You'll also be fined $500 per day until you comply." She shoved a formal-looking letter into my hands. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious, Mr. Whitmore. Good day." She turned on her heel and marched back to her black Mercedes SUV parked in front of my driveway, blocking my car in the process. I stood there holding the letter, absolutely stunned. I went back inside and immediately called my attorney, Marcus Chen, whom I had on retainer for business matters. After explaining the situation, he assured me that I was absolutely in the right and that the HOA had no legal standing. "They're trying to bully you," Marcus said over the phone. "It happens more often than you'd think. Some HOAs get drunk on their tiny bit of power and overstep their authority. Don't pay the fine, don't cease operations. I'll draft a response letter citing the relevant statutes. What if they actually sue? Then we'll win, and they'll likely have to pay your legal fees. Arizona has strong protections for home-based businesses. You're not running a dog grooming salon with customers coming and going all day. You're sitting at a computer. They don't have a leg to stand on." I felt somewhat reassured, but the encounter had left a bad taste in my mouth. I had always kept to myself in the neighborhood, maintained my property meticulously, and never caused any issues. I couldn't understand why Patricia Henderson had suddenly decided to target me. The next day, I received an email from the HOA with another demand. this time stating that I needed to remove my business registration from the property address within 48 hours. I forwarded it to Marcus, who responded with a strongly worded letter explaining the legal protections for home-based businesses under Arizona Revised Statutes Section 9461.05 and 11811, which specifically prohibited municipalities and HOAs from banning home occupations that met certain criteria. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. On Thursday morning, I discovered a bright orange sticker plastered across my front door declaring the property under HOA investigation for zoning violations. I was furious. Not only was it ugly and potentially damaging to my door's finish, but it was also defamatory. My neighbors would see this and assume I had done something wrong. I called Marcus immediately, and he advised me to photograph everything and file a complaint. I did exactly that, documenting the sticker from multiple angles before carefully removing it. I also set up my doorbell camera to record continuously, just in case Patricia decided to escalate further. That afternoon, my neighbor from across the street, an elderly man named Bill Morrison, knocked on my door. Bill was one of the few people I had actually gotten to know in the neighborhood. He was retired and spent most of his time working on his classic car collection in his garage. "Hey, Gregory," he said, looking uncomfortable. "I wanted to give you a heads up. Patricia came by my house yesterday asking questions about you. Wanted to know if you had clients coming and going, if there were strange cars parked on the street, if I heard any noise." I told her I've never noticed anything unusual, but she seemed determined to find something. "Thanks for letting me know, Bill. She's trying to shut down my business even though I'm not breaking any laws." Bill shook his head. "Patricia's been a problem ever since she took over as HOA president 2 years ago. She drove the Johnsons out of the neighborhood over the color of their mailbox, cost them thousands in legal fees before they just gave up and moved. She's relentless." This information was deeply concerning. Did the Johnsons ever try to fight back? They did at first, but Patricia made their lives miserable. Constant violation notices, fines for the tiniest infractions. They had 3 kids and just didn't have the energy to deal with it anymore. I thanked Bill for the warning and went back inside, feeling more determined than ever not to let Patricia bully me out of my home or my livelihood. I had built my web development business, Whitmore Digital Solutions, from the ground up over the past 8 years. I had clients across the country, from startups in Silicon Valley to established corporations in New York. My business was thriving, and I wasn't about to let some power-hungry HOA president destroy it. Marcus filed a formal response to the HOA's demands, and for about a week, things were quiet. I foolishly hoped that meant they had backed down. Instead, they were just preparing their next move. On a Monday morning, I found another letter in my mailbox. This one informed me that the HOA was scheduling a special hearing to discuss my ongoing violations, and that I was required to attend. The hearing was set for the following Thursday at 7 in the evening at the community clubhouse. I contacted Marcus, who cleared his schedule to attend with me. In the meantime, I prepared my case meticulously. I printed out copies of all relevant Arizona statutes, obtained a letter from the Maricopa County Planning and Development Department confirming that my home business was compliant with all zoning regulations, and compiled a list of exactly what my business entailed. The day of the hearing arrived, and I was as prepared as I could possibly be. Marcus met me at the clubhouse, a bland beige building near the neighborhood's main entrance. We walked in together, and I was surprised to see that the meeting room was packed. At least 30 of my neighbors had shown up, which seemed excessive for a hearing about a home-based web development business. Patricia sat at the head of a long table with 4 other HOA board members. A thin, nervous-looking man named Donald Pierce, who served as treasurer, a heavy-set woman named Ruth Summers, who was the secretary, and 2 other members whose names I didn't know. Patricia had a stack of papers in front of her and wore an expression of grim satisfaction. "Thank you all for coming," Patricia began, her voice taking on an officious tone. "We're here tonight to address a serious violation of our community covenants. Mr. Gregory Whitmore has been operating a commercial business out of his residence at 4782 Seguero Lane, in direct violation of Section 7, Paragraph 3 of our HOA covenants, which states, 'No lot shall be used except for residential purposes. No business, profession, or trade of any kind shall be conducted on any lot.'" She paused dramatically, looking around the room as if she had just revealed a massive scandal. Marcus stood up. "May I speak?" Patricia looked annoyed but nodded curtly. "State your name and relationship to Mr. Whitmore." "I'm Marcus Chen, Mr. Whitmore's attorney. While I appreciate the HOA's concern for maintaining neighborhood standards, your interpretation of the covenant is overly broad and conflicts with Arizona state law. State statute specifically protects the right of homeowners to engage in home-based businesses that don't generate excessive traffic, noise, or require modifications to the property. Mr. Whitmore's business falls squarely within those protections." "State law doesn't supersede our private covenants," Patricia countered. "Actually, it does when the covenant conflicts with statutory protections," Marcus replied smoothly. Arizona Revised Statutes Section 9 461.05 explicitly states that municipalities cannot prohibit home occupations, and case law has extended that protection to HOA restrictions as well. Mr. Whitmore is engaged in a lawful home occupation. Patricia's jaw tightened. He's running a business. He has a business license, a business website, and he advertises his services commercially. That makes it a commercial enterprise. I stood up, deciding it was time to speak for myself. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm a web developer. I sit at my computer and write code. I have video calls with clients, just like millions of Americans who work from home. No clients ever come to my house. There are no employees coming and going. There's no signage, no inventory, no modifications to the property. I'm doing exactly what the law allows." "You're making money from your home," Patricia insisted. "That's commercial activity." "So is anyone who works remotely for a company," I shot back. "By your logic, anyone who does any work from home is violating the covenant. That's absurd and completely unenforceable." A murmur ran through the crowd, and I noticed several people nodding. Patricia clearly noticed too, because her expression grew even more hostile. "We have documentation of excessive internet usage at your property," she said, pulling out a sheet of paper. "This kind of bandwidth consumption indicates commercial activity." I actually laughed at that. "You've been monitoring my internet usage. How is that even legal? And besides, streaming services use far more bandwidth than what I need for work. Are you going to fine everyone who watches Netflix?" Marcus jumped in before Patricia could respond. "Mrs. Henderson, unless you have evidence of actual violations like excessive traffic, noise complaints, or property modifications, you have no grounds to take action against Mr. Whitmore. We've brought documentation from Maricopa County confirming his compliance with all zoning regulations. I strongly advise this board to drop this matter before it becomes a costly legal battle you cannot win." Patricia's face had gone from red to almost purple. "This hearing is to determine whether Mr. Whitmore is in violation of our covenants, and I believe the evidence clearly shows he is. We'll now take a vote from the board." Donald Pierce, the treasurer, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Patricia, maybe we should consult with our attorney before taking any action. Mr. Chen has raised some valid points about state law." "We've already consulted with our attorney," Patricia snapped. "All those in favor of finding Mr. Whitmore in violation and upholding the $500 daily fine until he ceases business operations." Patricia raised her hand immediately. Ruth Summers hesitantly raised hers as well. The other 3 board members kept their hands down. "The motion fails," Marcus said quickly. "You don't have a majority." Patricia slammed her hand on the table. "This isn't over. We'll be taking this to our attorney and pursuing all available legal remedies." "Please do," Marcus replied calmly. "We'll be happy to defend Mr. Whitmore's rights in court, and we'll be seeking attorney's fees and damages for harassment." The hearing ended shortly after that, and several neighbors actually approached me on the way out to express their support. One woman, Sandra Liu, told me she ran a graphic design business from her home and was now worried Patricia would come after her next. A man named Tom Fletcher said he was a freelance accountant and worked exclusively from his home office. "She's trying to set a precedent," Tom said. "If she can shut you down, she'll go after all of us. We need to stick together on this." Over the next few days, I connected with Sandra, Tom, and 3 other neighbors who ran various home-based businesses. We formed a sort of informal alliance, sharing information and agreeing to support each other if Patricia targeted anyone else. True to her word, Patricia didn't give up. 2 weeks after the hearing, I received a formal complaint filed with the Maricopa County Superior Court. The HOA was suing me for breach of covenant and seeking an injunction to force me to stop operating my business from my home, plus back fines totaling $15,000 for the 30 days since their initial notice. Marcus had warned me this might happen, but seeing the actual lawsuit still felt like a punch to the gut. I was looking at months of legal battles, mounting attorney fees, and stress that would inevitably affect my business and my life. "Don't worry," Marcus said when we met to discuss strategy. "This is exactly the kind of overreach that courts hate. We have multiple defenses, and the law is clearly on our side. But I want you to be prepared for this to get ugly before it gets better." Patricia Henderson strikes me as someone who doesn't know when to quit. He was absolutely right about that. The lawsuit kicked off a campaign of harassment that was both petty and relentless. Patricia began driving by my house multiple times a day, often stopping to take photographs. She sent violation notices for the most ridiculous infractions. My trash can was visible from the street for 20 minutes after pickup time. There was a small oil stain on my driveway. My grass was allegedly a 1/4 inch too tall. Each violation came with a fine, and while Marcus assured me none of them would hold up in court, they were designed to wear me down. I had to photograph my property constantly, document pickup times, and respond to each frivolous complaint in writing. The breaking point came about 6 weeks into the lawsuit. I was in the middle of a crucial video call with a major potential client, a financial services company that could bring in over $200,000 in annual revenue, when my internet suddenly went dead. I checked my modem and router, and everything appeared to be functioning on my end. I called my internet service provider, and after running diagnostics, the technician told me that my service had been physically disconnected at the junction box. "That's weird," the technician said. "It looks like someone manually disconnected your line. Do you have any issues with your HOA? We sometimes see this when there's an HOA dispute." My blood ran cold. "How soon can you reconnect it?" "I can have someone out there tomorrow morning between 8 and noon. I had to reschedule my video call, giving a vague excuse about technical difficulties, but I could tell the client was unimpressed. In the consulting world, reliability is everything, and I had just shown myself to be unreliable. I immediately called Marcus and told him what happened. He was furious. "That's not just harassment, Gregory. If the HOA was behind that, it's potentially criminal. We need to document everything and possibly file a police report." I contacted my internet provider again and requested a written statement about the disconnection and any notes in their system about who might have requested it. 3 days later, I received a letter confirming that the disconnection had been performed at the request of property management and included a work order with Patricia Henderson's signature on it. She had actually impersonated a property owner or manager to have my internet service disconnected. That was fraud, and it had cost me a major client. The financial services company had moved forward with a competitor. Marcus immediately filed an emergency motion with the court, presenting evidence of the fraudulent service disconnection and requesting sanctions against Patricia and the HOA. We also filed a police report with the Scottsdale Police Department. 2 detectives came to my house to take my statement. Detective Sarah Mills was a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s who listened carefully as I explained the entire situation, from the initial confrontation to the fraudulent service disconnection. "You have any other evidence of harassment or property damage?" she asked. I showed her the doorbell camera footage, which clearly showed Patricia placing the violation notices on my door, photographing my property at odd hours, and on one occasion, actually walking into my driveway to peer through my office window. "That's trespassing," Detective Mills noted. "And depending on what she does with those photographs, possibly stalking. We'll need to interview her and the other HOA board members." The police investigation seemed to finally get through to Patricia that she had crossed a line. For about 2 weeks, the harassment stopped completely. No violation notices, no drive-bys, no letters. It was almost peaceful. Then I received a notice that the HOA was scheduling a special assessment vote to raise annual dues by $3,000 per household to cover increased legal expenses. The notice made it clear that these legal expenses were directly related to enforcement actions against covenant violations. Essentially, Patricia was trying to turn the entire neighborhood against me by making everyone pay for her vendetta. I immediately reached out to my network of home-based business owners in the neighborhood, and we decided to attend the next regular HOA meeting in force. Arizona law required that any special assessment over a certain threshold needed approval from a majority of homeowners, not just the board, so we needed to make sure our neighbors understood what was really happening. The meeting was held on a Wednesday evening, and the community room was even more packed than the hearing had been. Word had spread about the proposed assessment, and people were angry about the idea of paying an extra $3,000. Patricia opened the meeting with her usual self-important air. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, we're here to discuss a special assessment to cover legal fees associated with covenant enforcement. Unfortunately, one of our residents has chosen to flagrantly violate our community rules, and the board has been forced to take legal action to protect all of your property values." Before she could continue, Tom Fletcher stood up. "Mrs. Henderson, I've reviewed the lawsuit you filed against Gregory Whitmore, and it's completely frivolous. He's running a legitimate home-based business that's fully compliant with Arizona law. You're wasting HOA funds on a lawsuit you're going to lose, and now you want us to pay for it." "Mr. Fletcher, you're out of order," Patricia said sharply. "No, I'm not. This is the open comment period and I have the floor," Tom shot back. "I'm also a home-based business owner. I'm a CPA and I work from my home office. By your logic, I'm also violating the covenants." Are you going to sue me next? What about Sandra Liu? She's a graphic designer. Or Mike Torres, who's a freelance writer. Or the dozens of other people in this neighborhood who work from home. A loud murmur of conversation erupted. Several people started calling out questions, and Patricia had to bang her gavel repeatedly to restore order. Sandra stood up next. I've lived in Meadowbrook Hills for 6 years, and I've never seen Patricia Henderson use HOA authority fairly. She targets people she doesn't like and ignores actual violations when it suits her. The Rogers family on Cactus Drive has been parking their RV on their driveway for 2 years, which actually is a covenant violation. But Patricia doesn't care because she's friends with them. Meanwhile, she's spending tens of thousands of HOA dollars to harass Gregory over a completely legal business. That's slander, Patricia shouted, her face flushed. It's the truth and you know it, Sandra replied. Marcus, who had attended the meeting with me, stood up and addressed the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Marcus Chen, Mr. Whitmore's attorney. I want you to understand what's at stake here. The HOA has filed a lawsuit that goes against well-established Arizona law protecting home-based businesses. We will win this case. The only question is how much it's going to cost the HOA in legal fees before that happens. If you approve this special assessment, you're essentially funding Patricia Henderson's personal vendetta. And when we win, you'll likely be on the hook for our attorney fees as well, which could mean another special assessment. The room erupted again. People were shouting questions, demanding answers, and Patricia was losing control of the meeting. Donald Pierce, the treasurer, looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Ruth Summers was frantically whispering something to Patricia, but Patricia waved her off. We will proceed with the vote, Patricia announced, banging her gavel. All homeowners should have received a ballot by mail. You can submit them tonight or mail them in within the next 10 days. But the damage was done. Over the following week, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that the special assessment was being overwhelmingly rejected. People were furious about the attempt to make them pay for Patricia's lawsuit, and several homeowners had started a petition to recall the entire HOA board. Meanwhile, the criminal investigation into Patricia's fraudulent service disconnection was moving forward. Detective Mills called me to let me know they had interviewed Patricia, who had initially denied any involvement, but then changed her story when confronted with the signed work order. She's claiming she thought she had the authority to disconnect services to enforce HOA rules, Detective Mills explained. But that's not a defense. She committed fraud by misrepresenting herself to the utility company, and the district attorney is considering charges. What kind of charges are we talking about? Likely fraud and possibly criminal harassment. It depends on what the DA decides, but there's definitely enough evidence to prosecute. This news should have made me happy, but instead I just felt exhausted. I had never wanted any of this. I just wanted to live in my house and run my business in peace. The past 3 months had been incredibly stressful, affecting my work and my health. I had lost the major client because of the service interruption, and while my other clients had been understanding, I could sense some of them were concerned about my reliability. The civil lawsuit was slowly making its way through the court system. Marcus had filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that the HOA's claims were without merit and that my business was protected by state statute. The hearing on that motion was scheduled for early December, about 5 months after Patricia's initial confrontation on my doorstep. In the meantime, the neighborhood was in turmoil. The recall petition had gathered enough signatures to force a special election for the HOA board. Patricia was fighting it tooth and nail, claiming procedural irregularities and trying to invalidate signatures, but it looked like the election would go forward. I tried to focus on my work and stay out of the neighborhood drama as much as possible, but it was difficult when I was at the center of it all. Bill Morrison kept me updated on developments, including the news that Ruth Summers had resigned from the board, citing health reasons but privately telling people she couldn't support Patricia's actions anymore. The hearing on the motion to dismiss finally arrived on December 8th. Marcus and I arrived at the Maricopa County Courthouse early, and I was surprised to see that several of my neighbors had shown up to watch, including Tom Fletcher, Sandra Liu, and even Bill Morrison. The HOA's attorney was a man named Gerald Fox, who looked to be in his 60s, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that comes from years of courtroom experience. He argued passionately that HOA covenants were private contracts that homeowners agreed to when purchasing property, and that the courts should enforce those contracts. Your Honor, Mr. Whitmore knew about these covenants when he purchased his home, Fox argued. He signed documents acknowledging the restrictions. He can't now claim that state law allows him to violate those restrictions simply because he finds them inconvenient. Marcus stood to respond. Your Honor, Arizona law is crystal clear on this issue. Home-based businesses that don't generate significant traffic, noise, or require property modifications are expressly permitted. The legislature passed these protections specifically because HOAs were abusing their authority to prevent homeowners from engaging in lawful work. Mr. Whitmore's business is exactly the kind of home occupation the statute was designed to protect. He's a web developer who works alone from his office. There are no clients visiting the property, no employees, no signage, and no modifications. The HOA is attempting to enforce a covenant that directly conflicts with state law, and such enforcement is prohibited. The judge, a middle-aged woman named Jennifer Pacheco, asked several pointed questions of both attorneys. She seemed particularly interested in the details of my business operations and whether there was any evidence of actual disruption to the neighborhood. Mr. Fox, does your client have any evidence of complaints from neighbors about Mr. Whitmore's business activities? Judge Pacheco asked. Fox hesitated. Well, Your Honor, the violation itself is the issue, not whether neighbors have complained. But part of the rationale for covenant enforcement is maintaining neighborhood character and preventing nuisances, correct? Yes, Your Honor. So if there's no evidence of any actual nuisance or disruption, what exactly is the HOA trying to prevent? Fox seemed to struggle for an answer. The principle of the matter, Your Honor. If we allow one homeowner to violate the covenants, it opens the door for others. Even when state law expressly permits the activity in question. The covenants are a private contract, Your Honor. Judge Pacheco leaned back in her chair, and I could tell she was unimpressed with Fox's argument. After a few more minutes of back and forth, she announced she would take the matter under advisement and issue a written ruling within 30 days. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt cautiously optimistic. Marcus seemed pleased with how things had gone. Judge Pacheco clearly gets it, he said. She understands that the HOA is overreaching. I'd be shocked if she doesn't grant our motion. 2 weeks later, on December 22nd, Judge Pacheco issued her ruling. It was even better than I had hoped. She granted our motion to dismiss and issued a strongly worded opinion stating that HOA covenants cannot prohibit home-based businesses that are expressly permitted by Arizona statute. She also noted that the HOA's enforcement actions appeared to be arbitrary and potentially retaliatory, and warned that continued harassment could result in sanctions. Marcus immediately sent me a copy of the ruling, and I felt like a massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The lawsuit was over, and I had won. The HOA couldn't touch my business, but we weren't done yet. Marcus filed a motion for attorney's fees, seeking to recover the tens of thousands of dollars I had spent defending myself. Under Arizona law, when an HOA loses a lawsuit like this, they're typically required to pay the homeowner's legal fees. Patricia, predictably, tried to fight the attorney's fees motion, but she was running out of options. The special election for the HOA board was scheduled for mid-January, and it was clear from the pre-election forums that she was going to lose badly. Several neighbors had stepped up to run against her, including Tom Fletcher and a retired attorney named Helen Wagner. On the criminal side, the Maricopa County Attorney's Office had decided to proceed with charges against Patricia for fraud and criminal harassment. She was formally charged on January 5th and arraigned the following week. According to news reports, she pleaded not guilty and claimed she had been acting in her capacity as HOA president and believed she had the authority to request the service disconnection. The special election was held on January 15th, and Patricia was voted out in a landslide. Tom Fletcher was elected as the new president. Helen Wagner became vice president, and several other reform candidates won seats. The new board's first official act was to pass a resolution acknowledging that home-based businesses complying with state law were permitted in Meadowbrook Hills, and that the HOA would not take enforcement action against such businesses. The new board also agreed to settle my attorney's fees claim without further litigation, paying me $62,000 to cover my legal expenses. It turned out that the HOA's insurance carrier had been pushing for settlement all along, but Patricia had refused to authorize it. Patricia's criminal trial was scheduled for April. In the meantime, she had become a pariah in the neighborhood. She rarely left her house, and when she did, neighbors would avoid making eye contact with her. I almost felt sorry for her, but then I would remember the months of harassment, the lost client and the stress she had caused, and the sympathy would evaporate. The trial lasted 3 days. I was called as a witness and testified about the pattern of harassment, the violation notices, the surveillance, and ultimately the fraudulent service disconnection. The Internet service provider's representative testified about the work order with Patricia's signature and confirmed that she had represented herself as having authority over my property. Patricia's defense attorney tried to argue that she had made an honest mistake and that she genuinely believed she had the authority to request the disconnection as HOA president. But the prosecutor presented evidence of her extensive legal consultation before taking that action, showing that she had been specifically told by the HOA's own attorney that she could not legally do what she was planning. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on charges of fraud and criminal harassment. Judge Michael Stevens, who presided over the trial, seemed genuinely troubled by Patricia's actions. At sentencing in early May, Judge Stevens addressed Patricia directly. "Mrs. Henderson, you held a position of trust in your community, and you abused that position to pursue a personal vendetta against a neighbor who was doing nothing wrong. You cost your HOA tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees. You cost Mr. Whitmore clients and caused him significant stress and financial harm. And when your legal harassment wasn't enough, you resorted to fraud and criminal activity. Your actions were deliberate, calculated, and showed a shocking disregard for the law." He sentenced her to 18 months in county jail, with all but 60 days suspended, meaning she would serve 2 months behind bars. She was also placed on 2 years of probation, ordered to pay restitution to me and to the HOA, and required to complete anger management counseling. Patricia's husband, a quiet man I had seen around the neighborhood but never spoken to, looked devastated as the bailiff led her away. I later heard through Bill Morrison that they were planning to sell their house and move out of state once Patricia completed her sentence. As for me, life gradually returned to normal. My business recovered from the turmoil, and I actually landed 2 major new clients who had heard about my case and were impressed by how I had stood up for my rights. The story had gotten some local media coverage, and several news outlets had framed it as a cautionary tale about HOA overreach. The new HOA board under Tom Fletcher's leadership was night and day compared to Patricia's regime. They focused on actual community improvements rather than petty enforcement actions. They repainted the clubhouse, organized neighborhood events, and handled legitimate covenant violations with reasonableness and common sense. Tom stopped by my house one evening in late June, about a year after Patricia had first showed up on my doorstep. We sat on my back patio, drinking beer and watching the sun set over the mountains. "You know, you really changed this neighborhood," Tom said. "I don't think people realized how bad things had gotten with Patricia until you stood up to her. A lot of us were just keeping our heads down, hoping she wouldn't notice us." "I didn't really have a choice," I replied. "My business is my livelihood. I couldn't just fold because she decided to make up rules. Still, it took guts, and it cost you a lot of time and money." I shrugged. "I got the money back at least, and the time, well, that's just gone. But it was worth it to establish that homeowners have rights even against their HOAs." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and I reflected on everything that had happened. It had been one of the most stressful periods of my life, but I had learned some valuable lessons. I had learned that standing up for your rights sometimes means engaging in battles you never wanted. I had learned that communities are only as good as the people willing to get involved and hold leaders accountable. And I had learned that bullies, even ones with official titles and authority, eventually face consequences when they go too far. My business continued to thrive. I hired my first full-time employee later that year, though they worked remotely from their own home in Texas. I expanded my service offerings and started speaking at web development conferences about remote work and home-based businesses. Several times, people approached me after talks to share their own stories of HOA harassment, and I was able to connect them with resources and legal information. Sandra Liu and I became good friends, and we actually started collaborating on projects, with her handling design work while I focused on development. Tom Fletcher proved to be an excellent HOA president, and the neighborhood became genuinely pleasant to live in. Bill Morrison and I continued our friendship, and I even helped him set up a website to showcase his classic car collection. Patricia Henderson served her 60 days in jail and was released on probation. She and her husband sold their house and moved to somewhere in Oregon, according to the neighborhood gossip. I never saw her again after the sentencing hearing, and I was perfectly fine with that. Looking back on the whole ordeal, I sometimes wondered what had motivated Patricia's crusade against me in the first place. Was it really just about enforcing covenants, or was there something else? Bill Morrison had a theory that Patricia was bitter about her own failed business ventures and resented seeing others succeed. Sandra thought Patricia was just a controlling personality who needed to dominate others. Tom believed she had gotten drunk on the small amount of power that came with being HOA president. The truth probably involved elements of all those factors. But ultimately, the why didn't matter as much as the what and the how. What mattered was that I had stood my ground, fought for my rights, and won. What mattered was that an entire neighborhood had woken up to the importance of accountability in community leadership. What mattered was that the law had worked the way it was supposed to, protecting homeowners from overreach and holding someone accountable for criminal behavior. My home office, the space that had sparked this entire conflict, became my favorite room in the house. Every time I sat down at my desk to work, I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. This wasn't just where I ran my business. It was a symbol of what I had fought for and won. The legal precedent from my case actually ended up being cited in several other Arizona cases involving HOA restrictions on home-based businesses. Marcus told me that Judge Pacheco's opinion had been particularly influential because of how clearly it articulated the limits of HOA authority versus state law protections. Several homeowners reached out to thank me for fighting the battle that made their own situations easier to resolve. I also became involved in efforts to reform Arizona HOA laws more broadly. I testified before a state legislative committee considering new regulations to prevent HOA abuse and provided input on language that would strengthen protections for homeowners. It felt good to turn my negative experience into something positive that could help others. By the summer of the following year, the whole ordeal felt like ancient history. I had moved on with my life, my business was doing better than ever, and Meadowbrook Hills had transformed into a genuinely supportive community. We had neighborhood barbecues, holiday parties, and a sense of camaraderie that I suspect hadn't existed in years. One warm evening in August, I was finishing up some work when my doorbell rang. I glanced at the camera feed and saw a young couple standing on my porch, looking nervous. I opened the door, curious. "Hi, I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said. "I'm Jennifer Hayes and this is my husband, Mark. We're thinking about buying the Morrison house across the street. Bill told us about what happened with the HOA a couple years ago, and we wanted to talk to you about it." I invited them in and spent the next hour telling them the story. They listened intently, asking questions about how the new HOA board operated and whether they should be worried about similar issues. "The thing is," Mark explained, "we both work from home. I'm a software engineer and Jennifer is a freelance photographer. We want to make sure we're not walking into a nightmare situation." I assured them that the new board was completely different and that home-based businesses were not only accepted but common in the neighborhood. "Bill's house is great, and you'd be wonderful neighbors. Don't let what happened with Patricia scare you off. That situation was an anomaly, and it's been resolved." They ended up buying Bill's house, and they fit into the neighborhood perfectly. Jennifer even started teaching photography classes at the clubhouse, which became incredibly popular. It was exactly the kind of positive community activity that the new HOA board encouraged. As time went on, I found that I could tell the story of my battle with Patricia Henderson without the anger and stress that had consumed me during the actual events. It became a story about standing up for what's right, about the importance of knowing your legal rights, and about how communities can come together to demand better leadership. I never regretted fighting back against Patricia's harassment, despite the cost and stress. Some battles are worth fighting, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. The home-based business owners in Meadowbrook Hills could work in peace because I had refused to back down. Neighbors who might have faced similar harassment over trivial issues were protected because the community had witnessed the consequences of unchecked HOA power and demanded change. My web development business continued to grow and evolve. I eventually moved into a dedicated commercial office space as the company expanded, but I maintained my home office for certain projects and as a backup workspace. The irony wasn't lost on me that I now had an actual commercial space, Years after Patricia had accused me of running a commercial operation from my home, I still live in that house on Saguaro Lane in Meadowbrook Hills. It's my home, my sanctuary, and the place where I won one of the most important battles of my life. Every time I pull into the driveway, I remember that first confrontation with Patricia Henderson and how it spiraled into months of harassment, legal battles, and eventually criminal prosecution. But I also remember the neighbors who supported me, the attorney who fought for my rights, the judge who saw through the HOA's overreach, and the jury that held Patricia accountable for her actions. I remember the community coming together to demand better leadership and the positive changes that followed. The whole experience taught me that homeowners associations can be forces for good or ill, depending entirely on who's in charge and whether the community is engaged enough to hold them accountable. It taught me that knowing your legal rights is essential, especially when facing institutional power. And it taught me that sometimes the right thing to do is to stand and fight, even when it would be easier to give in. I hope that my story serves as both a warning and an inspiration. A warning about the potential for HOA abuse and the importance of due diligence before buying into a neighborhood with restrictive covenants. An inspiration for anyone facing similar harassment to stand up for their rights and not let bullies win, no matter how official their position might be. In the end, justice prevailed. The law worked as it should. Patricia Henderson faced consequences for her criminal actions. The HOA system in Meadowbrook Hills was reformed, and I got to continue running my business from my home office exactly as Arizona law permitted. That's all I ever wanted in the first place.